Welcome to Africa Media Australia. My name is Clyde Sharady, and today I have a special guest in the studio. I've got Tamar Hopkins, who is the principal solicitor at the Flemington and Kensington Community Legal Centre in Melbourne. Welcome to the studio, Tamar.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here.
How are you today?
Good, thank you.
All right, we're very happy to have you here, and we want to talk a little bit about yourself and the community centre where you work. Tell us about yourself.
Okay. Well, I'm a solicitor at a community legal centre in Melbourne. I'm a solicitor at the Flemington and Kensington Community Legal Centre. Yeah. And I've been there since 2006. Before that, I was working at community legal centres in Victoria, and then prior to that in the ACT. When I started working at the Flemington and Kensington Community Legal Centre is the first time I became aware of the issues facing newly arrived African Australians and the police. Mm-hmm. And so I guess it might be good to give your listeners a bit of an introduction into the Flemington Kensington Legal Centre and where it's situated. Mm-hmm. So the Flemington Legal Centre is a community legal centre in the inner west of Melbourne, and it's surrounded by large numbers of public housing estates. Mm-hmm. So there's the Flemington Housing Estate, there's Kensington Estates, there's Ascot Vale, and there's North Melbourne. And those housing estates have been home to newly arrived Australians for many years. Yeah. The legal centre was set up in the 80s, yep. And from the moment it opened its doors, issues around policing of young people in the area was an issue that the legal centre has dealt with. And for years it has been raising complaints with the body that is in charge with receiving complaints mm-hmm. about police. Since the 2000s, the complaints that have been received by the legal centre have started to come from people from African and Afghani as well as Turkish backgrounds. So there's been a shift depending on who's in the region, really. Exactly. But the local Flemington police station has been a training station for many years. And so new recruits have come into the station and have been, I guess, have been trained in the culture of what that station has been doing over that period. And I guess we've had concerns about the adequacy of that training in terms of, particularly recently, issues around whether there has been racial biases in the way that people have been policed. And that's still a very dominant issue that we are looking at. So in 2006, there was an operation at the Flemington Police Station which targeted, had the effect of targeting a large number of African and Afghani youth, and we received numerous complaints by those people about how they were being policed, and the complaints were a range of things, from being stopped numerous times and asked for names and addresses by police who knew those names and addresses very well because they'd stopped that person many times. Yes. To also physical assaults in people's homes, on the street, and back in the police station. So some very serious kinds of misconduct were being reported. Often those assaults were accompanied by people being told to get back to Africa by the police. So very much strong racial context with what was happening. So we decided to try and send a whole lot of complaints into the Office of Police Integrity. We hoped that they would see that this was a systemic issue worthy of independent investigation. Unfortunately, however, that office ended up sending those complaints back down to Victoria Police, and they were investigated by police in regional areas. So there was a police investigation of those complaints, and those complaints were almost all came back as unsubstantiated. So that was a great concern to us and our clients that these matters had come back unsubstantiated. And so we realised that we needed to try another option than using the complaint system. And so we started using the courts in a number of ways. So the first way that we've been using is by defending people who have made a complaint about being assaulted, but have also been charged by police.
Ah.
So where they've got a hinder police or a resist police type charge.
Yes.
So we've been defending people in magistrates' courts and children's courts against these charges. And what we've found is that in 9 cases where the Ethical Standards Department or the police who'd investigated the complaint came back with an unsubstantiated finding, that the court, in fact, dismissed the police charges against our client and believed our client's evidence over the police evidence.
That's interesting, isn't it?
So, yeah, it really shows that when you put these matters before an independent person and the evidence is actually tested and police are cross-examined about what they've done, that the real truth of what has happened can come out. Right. So it really shows where our complaint system needs to be headed if it wants to actually start bringing about accountability. We need an independent system.
I see that you've been really busy, trying to address some of these issues. Do you think that the training, you indicated previously that the Flemington station has been sort of a training station. Do you think that actually has some sort of influence on how not only Africans but new and migrant communities in that area are being policed?
I think it could well have had an influence. It's hard to see how. I think there have been a number of people at the Flemington police station who really have stayed for years, and the way they police has been imprinted on the new recruits coming in.
Yes.
And the way they police, has been questioned by us. So that's one issue. The other thing is, I guess you have a whole lot of impressionable young police who come in wanting to do good and then getting met by an old school way of policing, and that just doesn't really kind of mesh. So I mean there are some concerns there.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, I think there are all sorts of issues around police training.
One thing that you mentioned also about the complaint, I've heard a lot of young people who say it's almost useless to make a complaint through the police or OPI, because most of them would come back and say there's no evidence. Is that what you're getting also from community members?
So that's right. I mean, what happens is that these complaints go in. They are by and large, they are overwhelmingly investigated by police. Police will bring a particular lens to the evidence that they're looking at, and that lens is one that historically and appears to have a racial bias, and it also tends to view complainants as criminals trying to use the system. So that's the kind of lens that they're looking at. So you have police who are looking at the evidence, collecting the evidence and making decisions about the evidence, and furthermore the evidence is not tested. So it's done on, the police will go out and they'll interview, they may or may not interview the complainant, and they'll interview the officers, but there will be no independent forum in which to cross-examine the police officers to see if what they're saying stands up. So what you get is 1 or 2 civilians with their accounts, and then maybe 4 or 5 officers with their accounts. And the police investigators will say that the weight of evidence favours the police account over the civilian accounts, and they'll find it unsubstantiated. And that happens again and again and again, and it's going to happen that way until we have independent decision makers and until the evidence is actually tested.